So let me focus our conversation on what I had intended to mention for today. The formation of MK in South Africa is a typical result of a liberation struggle narrative that has gone wrong when fellow Africans feel that the ruling party has lost the purpose of the liberation struggle. I've sat here many times often and stomached insults from Zimbabweans and South Africans, the educated group that will come to me and lambast me for the ZANU-PF relationship, ANC sympathy and stuff like that. Because in as much as these leaders are deemed, in some cases, implicated in the slowdown process of the development of the country and continent, yet these organizations remain as primary sources of the entire conversation on liberation and development. The options we have are quite complex because it will mean the failure of the blacks must give admittance to the rescue of the white community and the colonial community. As it were, South Africa is between the deep sea and the hard rock to decide whether to have just two ideas, to either be colonized by the colonial masters, the white monopoly capital, or to be colonized by and patronaged by the black African business people. This is not a mix of words. If we are going to have a political conversation that is sponsored from external sources, and external in one way, more than one, is to say, is it external because the money is coming from outside, or it is external because even the local people, the colonial champions of the industry, are purely white, and as such their allegiance to the political conversation remains biased towards the colonial system and their handlers, who are the Western political struggles. ANC joining with DA gives that highlight a clarion call that the Africans have failed to manage and govern their country, and as such, this is halfway between ANC, a liberation struggle body, betraying the struggle and going back to the same colonial party that was the reason of the struggle. Now they're walking back to the table for negotiations. South Africa, ANC and DA negotiations cannot take place in the armpit of 2024 elections. But if that negotiation must start, it must start in 1994 by visiting the sunset clauses, by visiting the truth and reconciliation issues, because fundamentally the surgence of DA into the political arena means a permanent burial of the liberation struggle atrocities that were conducted by the colonial system. And now when the colonialists are back in power, they will make sure that the blacks are totally destroyed, sent to court and arrested, and them as white people can begin to take the upper hand of correcting the wrongs of the blacks and beginning to restore South Africa to their colonial agenda, which they had before 1994. I put up a poster some years ago, almost 3 years ago, if not 2.5 years ago, of the Sunset Clause agreements allow the blacks to get into power. And when they get into power, identify the key political leaders within the African National Congress, give them business, corrupt all of them. Underline the word corrupt all of them. Allow them to run the government and run it down. They must run the government and run it down. And at the end of the 25 years, they're all corrupted. Arrest all of them and publicize the corruption of the black people until the black people themselves feel that their black leaders have betrayed them. And the very same black people that have been colonized would wish and pray for the return of the colonial system, which will then give them bread and milk at their doorsteps every morning. So there you have it. And if I was the National Party, the NP, which transformed itself into the DA, this is how I would think. For it will not be easy to hand over power without blackmailing those that you are giving power to, so that you can return power back to yourself. And DA has played a fantastic game, right on the note, and have played every card in the book, leaving ANC no other choice but to unite with the colonial system to be able to restore South Africa. Here is the two basic scenarios. ANC joining hands with DA will become a business solution in the short term. And within the short term, we may be able to see a sizable amount of ANC stalwarts, leaders, liberation struggle backbones walking away from the ANC and joining MK. And when that happens, the provincial and municipality structures will be almost put into chaos. And while they are doing that, option B is that the joining of ANC and DA may as well begin to precipitate an alienation of KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, Northwest, and parts of Limpopo into the MK fold to challenge ANC with their apartheid amalgamation. That could render KwaZulu-Natal ungovernable. That could render Thokoza and parts of Johannesburg, Soweto, and most of the mining spaces quite volatile spaces of ungovernable behaviors. By no means will this come out from Jacob Zuma. It will come out from disgruntled members who may feel that Jacob Zuma is playing the politics while they are having the bread and butter issues as fundamentals of their reaction. Honorable Jacob Zuma will constantly be saying restraint, but in his calling for peace and calling for slowing down, it may not be very audible in the short term that the entire population of 7 million, if not 8 million members would be patient with the arrogance of the ANC in joining hands with the DA. Option number 2 is ANC joining hands with all the small parties, excluding DA, excluding EFF maybe, and excluding MK. Isolating MK and isolating EFF and MOP and isolating DA, go back to the grassroots parties and form a minority government. But even in the minority space, ANC will have to address the requests from the small parties. And why is it that the small parties have been formed in the sunset of 1994? It can only say they have been formed because ANC is failing to deliver. So in the Peace Pact, ANC might need to start attending to the needs of the small parties. Option 3 will be ANC joining hands with EFF and joining hands with MK. This becomes very interesting because ANC gave birth to EFF through Julius Malema, who was a member and a leader in the youth movement, and MK, which is being led by an ANC card-holding member, who is Jacob Zuma. Therefore, EFF, MK, and ANC are a family that if they could unite and begin to discuss their problems behind closed doors, we may be able to find a permanent solution to white monopoly capital. This, the DA calls it the doomsday, not for Africans, the doomsday for the white capitalists. Because the uniting of EFF, MK, and ANC will be able to unify the African voice towards the transformation of the economy, with a definite voice on the Pan-African drive through EFF, with a definite voice for indigenization and BEE, which is an MK agenda, and included to that will also be indigenous governance systems. ANC then contributes the legacy and the history of liberation. That for me will be the best, unless ANC does not see it in that light, and they would consider that the one man, Cyril Ramaphosa's job as a president is more important than the party, is more important than the country. And ANC has to make a decision whether to protect one man at the expense of the party or at the expense of the entire country, or to sacrifice Ramaphosa and then be able to liberate the country into the multilateral democracy system which they've accepted. And they must not be afraid of doing this, because O.R. Tambo came and he went. Nelson Mandela came and he went. Walter Sisulu came and he went. Thabo Mbeki came and he went. Mutande came and he went. And Mbeki came and he went. And Jacob Zuma came and he went. What is it that South Africa thinks that Cyril Ramaphosa is the alpha and omega of South Africa, when Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma were not even allowed to finish their terms, because the country felt that the national politics was more important than the personal gravitas of a political leader utilizing his networks around the business environment to sacrifice the black people, the party, and the nation at wide. So that creates a very complex issue for ANC. Do they want to place the entire mandate of ANC on an individual, or are they going to sacrifice a leader for the sake of the nation? That I leave it to the entire ANC negotiation skills. And while they are busy debating as to who must come into power, ANC must remember that their unification with DA will throw the entire ANC leadership into the courtrooms. And when they are thrown into the courtrooms with the Mashatile as vice president and the vote of no confidence on Ramaphosa, then automatically John Steenhuisen might have to stand in as deputy president or even president himself, looking at the pact in which they're going to sign. The speech given by Mbalula becomes very irresponsible when he says that don't come to us negotiating the departure of Cyril Ramaphosa. We're not willing to talk. Then if you're not willing to talk, then don't talk at all, because the discussion between political parties on a coalition government will include those talks. And I think, as an observer, maybe I could be wrong, if ANC had done to Cyril Ramaphosa what they asked and they done to Jacob Zuma, maybe we would not be in this mess. Had we been given a new president in ANC towards election, maybe ANC would have gained a new traction of energy, and looking at the amount of pressure that was coming from pressure groups and other political parties, maybe the new leader would have been able to start negotiating with some of these parties to allow for a smooth transition. ANC politics, therefore, is at a crossroads, whether they are going to go back to the colonial masters and negotiate the sunset clauses, or they're going to go to black people's parties and account for 30 years of inactivity. And while we are on that, you can say as much insults as you want on Zimbabwe and say as much praise on the economy of South Africa as you want. At the bottom of this conversation, put this on record, there is nothing people are fighting for except for land. The concept of land redistribution, land reclamation, land rights restoration, blacks having access to land remains as a fundamental plateau decision of all political parties. If you want to mark my words, go through the entire 150 political parties registered and maybe 50 or 60 of them that made to the ballot, I don't know how many made it there, and look at their land policy. Depending on the land policy, you'll be able to identify the funders and the donors who helped them to run elections. The border issue is secondary, but primarily the manifestos were supposed to secure the white capital monopolists to say, we will protect your land rights. And I don't know when whites had land rights and blacks don't have land rights. I don't know when there was a transition between white people being protected by the Constitution and black people being condemned by the same Constitution. Whites are allowed to own land. Blacks must negotiate with the banks and with the Constitution. Which Constitution did the colonialists use to take land from blacks? And if there was no Constitution at the taking away of the land, there cannot be a Constitution at the taking away of the land. Mugabe had to make that decision at the sunset of his life because the country was becoming ungovernable. Take land, don't negotiate, have discussions, and if the white people want to go to court, let's go to court after we have the land. We can't go to court to negotiate the claiming back of land because no one who has taken land will be able to relinquish it and give it back to its rightful owners without staging a battle. So we can do as much politics as we want, but ultimately the politics of land. You can laugh at Zimbabwe. We went down the drain to become the highest inflation country in the world. Western world scorned us, put us on sanctions, lambasted us, and downgraded us into a junk state, and etc. But as we stand right now, yes, we have not made it. Slowly but surely, we have gained back our independence. We have gained back our dignity. We have gained back our access to resources and utilization of land and means of production. And until South Africans, black South Africans, have access to means of production, we are going nowhere. I hear people talking about employment. Why can't the white people be employees also? No, the white people are the employers. Africans must be employees. Who wants to be employed? We need to change that language of making Africans employees.